20 for 18 months. So hooray. So thank you for bringing people out in droves. I know we have some folks who are on the live stream, so welcome to you as well. I don't have a formal introduction, and in many ways your presentation is telling your own story. I will say what I touched on in worship this morning is that these folks bought me lunch. I go up to one of these newcomer lunches thinking I'm just going to hear, everybody's story is different, but this story is so different, so powerful. You two have been woven into the North Shore for a little while. You're at the Walgreens in Shorewood in the pharmacy section. You're in data science? No. Some data computer job.
I'm in finance. Analytics for Johnson Controls.
Okay, and I'll have to give you this. Financial analytics for Johnson Controls, important stuff. So I'm going to just hand things over to you, and you all have us for, we usually go until about 11:40, something like that. And you can kind of mix it up in terms of your presentation and questions as much as you'd want. So Chester and Ambreen Hussain, please give it up.
So, hi, good morning. We've been at Christ Church for about 5 or 6 months. We've been around, Ethan was christened here, so we know a few of you. So I should probably start off the talk by all the views expressed are solely by the talker and doesn't associate in any way to Christ Church, because some of the views are sensitive to the general consensus in the US at times, but we live them, so it's just how you come out. So just a brief background, we're both essentially fourth generation Christians, so we grew up in the Episcopal Church, or the Church of England / Pakistan as it's called in the rest of the world. My father is the organist of the Lahore Cathedral. He's been the organist since the 60s, so I can't count. Ambreen's uncle was the Episcopal Bishop of Karachi. He passed away recently, but he was one of the longest serving bishops and one of the most firebrand speakers in the Christian church in Pakistan. He actually went to seminary with Bishop Augustine, who worked with the diocese in Milwaukee for a while as well. So the story kind of starts, or our story kind of starts, we are 80s kids. We unfortunately were born right after the Islamist general took over Pakistan. So Pakistan was very different from what my parents remember. It was a lot more how the West would relate to how a country is. We grew up with like one TV channel, one forced language. Basically anything that is considered fun is haram and illegal, and you're not allowed to do pretty much anything. The cinemas were closed down. There was no music. So that 10 years kind of took Pakistan on a trajectory of people were Arabized. Pakistan is in the subcontinent, Asia, very different culture, very different mindset. So even our state, music and stuff like that, that was kind of like gradually eroded off people's brains and mindset and how they kind of think, essentially. So that Arabization of the country kind of like set the stage for what was to follow. The general met his fate, let's just say that. And then after, what came was the Islamically radicalized politicians. And that kind of set events in motion where, we were 3% of the population, so which is, again, not a lot, but from 3%, I think the latest stat is 1.59%. So the plan essentially was to basically make this country completely pure. Pakistan means land of the pure, so we're the impurity. So by any means necessary, either assimilate or expel, whatever works, essentially was the mode that they adopted. So there was a mass exodus per se of anybody who was like able to get out of the country or was forced out. Somehow some people found refuge in what is now Dubai. Dubai was being built, so a lot of Christians basically took jobs like construction workers and drivers and nurses, and basically took all the jobs the Arabs didn't want to do and just went there because UAE kind of turned a blind eye. They said, all right, you're the working class, you can have your churches or whatever. A lot of people went to Libya, pretty much the same scenario. Iraq, some of them. So even though the dictators like Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, they're generally dictators, but they're what's basically in between extremist Islamists and everything else. So a lot of people left. We found ourselves in the southwest of London. Our parents, because we knew people in the church, we somehow got to the UK. And we found ourselves in the Christian quarter / ghetto of southwest London, Hounslow, near the Heathrow Airport area. And that's where we grew up. And this is going back to about 97, 98. We were both in high school at the time. And our families knew each other from back home as well. We went to the same church. We more or less lived each other in London as well. We went to school there, got married there. We were both settled in our professions. We had already had one child at that point. When the church in Pakistan, they made an appeal. So there's this Christian women's university called the Canadian College for Women, which is in Lahore, Pakistan. So basically all the check marks, Christian Women's University. So they were all ticked. So that was nationalized in the mid-70s, prior to General Zia's takeover of Pakistan. This university, which was owned by the Presbyterian Church of America, went to government hands. So the Presbyterian Church fought back. They went to court and took them basically 35 years to get the university back. And then once they got the university back, they had this, oh my God, what are we going to do moment? Because it was bad enough as it is. You're trying to run a Christian women's university. They don't want that. They don't want their future mothers to be doctrined with the Christian faith, so then your next generation might turn out to be apostate. So they're anti that, and then you cannot have essentially white Americans going there and working. That's a big bullseye painted. So they made an appeal through the Church of Pakistan that if there were any Christians from Pakistan in the Christian diaspora all over the world, if someone was willing and able to go back and help in any way that they could. So I was working for Xerox in their European headquarters at the time, which is just north of London in a place called Uxbridge. And so we read about it and thought, you know what, that's something we could probably help with. So we applied and went through a couple of, there was no WhatsApp or Teams or Zoom at that time. So it was a lot of phone calls with the US and a lot of people who were from the US, an ex-congressman, James Tabby, who had actually gone to Pakistan to work on a boys' Christian university, which was going through the same process. So we spoke to all of these people, and they said, okay, we're looking for a finance manager. Would you take it? Make sure, I get to do what I do, and I get a career jump. So we went. And so we left the UK in December 2009, packed our bags, okay, we're gonna go and like have a little Christmas break in Pakistan, and then right after start working for the university. So we get there, we do our Christmas break, and then I get to work on January 4th, I think, and the government's taken a stay. So the job I moved all the way over from, is basically no longer there. The reason being, when they denationalized the college, what they said was that, yes, it's going to be a tripartite arrangement, which basically means the Presbyterian Church, the Church of Pakistan, a board which was made up of basically prominent members of the Christian community, and the state government would be running it. Now, the state government wanted to keep the purse strings in their hand because there was obviously a lot of money flowing in from the US, and they wanted to make sure they were the ones controlling it and making sure what's going where. And the person who was actually the finance manager was a retired bureaucrat, Islamist bureaucrat, if I may add, and they wanted him to be there. They're like, well, this 28-year-old kid's going to take over this. That's not going to work. But so we thought, you know, first we thought, oh my God, you know what, this is not working out, let's just go back. And like, cut our losses short, perhaps I can reapply, like reset. The only flip side and the reason we stayed was she was 8 months pregnant with our son. So, and you can't fly back when it's your 9 months. All right, you know what? We're now stuck at this point. We can't go back, so let's just try and ride it out. So our elder son, who is not here because he was watching TV till 2 in the morning, so he was born on March 22nd. So that basically meant we were there for another 2 months. And by that time, conversations had progressed. And they were talking, okay, you know what, we're going to try and challenge this in court. We're trying to give him another carrot and see, hey, if you're involved in this, you can let us have this. We really want to do it this way. This person's come all the way from there. And we have a vision in mind. And we want to pursue that. So that kind of progressed. Luckily, by Pakistan standards, there was like an eye blink, because by September 14th, a deal was done where they let me take over the finance function and whatever else that followed with it. And this was a place stuck in time. They had no computers. They had actual ledger registers. I'd never seen one. So, but it's kind of like your wish list. So that's when, let's say, the US government, because it was partially funded by the State Department educational outreach programs as well, when they go to a third world country and they're trying to do a program, it's a wish list. You can do what you want, money's not an issue kind of thing. So I set out modernizing the systems, hiring new people, so they were super unhappy about, hey, everybody who's been here for 30 years is going and new people are coming in. But I mean, that was something that was necessary, and we did a pretty decent job. So we had like cloud-based ERPs in place, qualified young individuals, a lot of them from the Christian community in place. And that was basically my job, and that's what we were doing. The flip side of that, obviously, is that you have to deal with the provincial government and a lot of other stakeholders within the government setting on a regular basis. And after a while, I'm not the kind of person who kind of minces their words, so they're like, okay, we've got to be careful of this one and kind of be friendly with him, because every time he doesn't like something we're doing or trying to do, he voices his concerns. So this kind of took us to the era, which was like a super high turmoil period for Pakistan. The Pakistani Taliban were getting bolder. There was a lot more attacks all over. There were, and the general consensus, especially in the outer cities, was changing. So tolerance was taking an all-time low. And basically, around that point was, I don't know if any of you are aware of the Asia Bibi case at all. So Asia Bibi, this is, I think, 2010, late 2010 or early 2011. So she was this Christian orchard worker who was basically convicted of blasphemy just for the mere fact because she drank water from the same cup that was intended for the Muslim workers. And then everything that follows essentially is, if you're lucky, the police arrest you and puts you in jail. Let's just say that. So the governor of our state, Salman Taseer, he stepped in to try and speak on the lady's behalf. Now, Salman Taseer was an accountant by profession as well. And he was the managing partner of KPMG before he got into politics. And so he'd basically grown up in the West, and he had liberal views, and he spoke out about it. So he was basically standing at a pulpit, pretty much like this, and he had a security escort, so people standing here and here. And he said, this is not blasphemy, and the people who are claiming that this is blasphemy are ignorant. And before he could finish his sentence, one of his security guards pulled out his gun and shot him in the head. So some of the comments I made subsequent to that, because KPMG were our auditors, and we worked very closely with his firm, who he was still a partner of, not active, but still. So I think this is a turning point where, because a couple of conversations that I had with people around this time was what kind of set what events were supposed to follow in motion. So a year after, so our eldest is autistic, Angie, she's 13. She's pretty high on the spectrum, so that's something we relate to a lot. And in, I think, 2012, early 2012, there was a 14-year-old Christian girl who was heavily autistic. And so they set you up for stuff like this. So they handed her a Quran. And a heavily autistic child just kind of went like this with the book. And they said, well, she's insulted the book, so this is punishable by death. So they throw her in jail. There's a big outcry. She was very vocal about it in a lot of circles as well. And so was I. And then that kind of put us in a trajectory which was at loggerheads with a couple of Islamist liaisons who we met with on a very regular basis from the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Finance for the state. Because they're like, well, you know, we need to sit down with you guys and kind of explain how what they're saying is right, and you're misguided in your opinion. I'm like, well, I mean, it's pretty hard to be misguided. Autistic child doesn't know what she's doing. You hand her a book. What do you expect? I'm like, well, Allah should tell her, and if she lets him. I'm like, yeah, right. So let's not go into that, but sure. So that kind of, so like I said, so this was a period where something was happening every day. The Sri Lankan cricket team was visiting Pakistan for a cricket tour. Cricket's pretty big. Cricket is like NFL of the rest of the world. So, and then unfortunately there's misfires. So like the Aaron Rodgers of the Pakistani team was a Christian guy named Yusuf Yohanna, which means Joseph John. So from very humble roots, both his parents were sewage workers, because that's what most rural Christians are allowed to do. Because your birth certificate and your passport have your religion on it, so you have a different set of rules that apply to you. So, for example, even though I was born in Pakistan, I could never run for office. Up till the early 2000s, Christians in Pakistan could not vote. Only Muslims could. So there's like a bunch of different things that regulate. So completely different world. It's just so multifaceted that when you start picking at it, it's hard for me to completely make you guys understand the context of what's going on. So this guy, they enticed him with money. They actually married him off to one of the sponsor's daughters. So this guy converted, and that was like a big blow for Christians. He became their poster boy. They're like, well, you know, he was such a well-known sportsman, and he saw the merit in the faith, so you should consider that as well. And they kept on circling back to, you know, you're such a smart guy, you're well-educated. Being educated is like a superpower in Pakistan. The literacy rate of the country is 17%. By literacy, if you can read a newspaper in Urdu, you're considered literate. So that's a big win if they can get you to be on their side, and if they can get you to convert, that's like a big bonus for them. So, so that's when the conversations initially started. That, hey, you know, we need to sit down with you and kind of, so when the devil always comes bearing gifts. So they were super nice initially. They're like, you know, we should sit down, you should come over for Eid, and we'll talk. I'm like, okay. And then I think what basically really emboldened us and our activism piece got a lot more pronounced was when the church bombings happened in 2013 in Peshawar. So 2 suicide bombers got into the Peshawar church. One went straight for the church building, the other one went for the Sunday school, and they both blew themselves up. So there was a lot of casualties in the church building. There were 0 survivors in the Sunday school. So the congregation lost their entire next generation in the Sunday school. The week after, as a show of faith and solidarity, we thought that, we should go as well. And that's a no-go area. If we had told our parents or anyone, that said, are you out of your mind? This is a city which is, 16 miles from the Afghan border. I think the survival rate, if you'd say something like this in a place like Peshawar, is, I think, 20% under 0. So, but we went anyway. So we set this Facebook group up, and we said, hey, we need to go. There's like tons of people, dozens upon dozens, because that was a jam-packed, massive cathedral-sized church. And the guy had ball bearings and nails and everything packed and wrapped around him. And these people, and these are all laborers, because obviously the system's set up that they cannot be anything but. So we pooled our resources, our cousins, her sister, our friends from the UK, we all pooled in, we collected money, we made envelopes for like 10,000 rupees each, because that's a fortune in Pakistan, and I think it's about 20 bucks here. So we went, and it was just heartbreaking. They basically had to use shovels to get whatever's left of the children and put them in like mass coffins. And then we visited a bunch of hospitals, and there's no words to explain. There were people with like ball bearings still in them. Because they're Christian, they're getting minimal care. And that fundamentally changed us. Especially what changed us was there was this one little girl. She was the exact same age as our daughter. And she had ball bearings in her all over. And they said, well, her blood's being poisoned as it is. She's not going to survive. Simple, if she stays here, she's just not going to survive. So he said, well, what's the solution? They said, well, the only solution is that she has to go to Lahore. I'm like, yeah, we're on our car, we can drive her. I'm like, well, she needs an ambulance. So the only way to get her was to get an ambulance to drive from Lahore to Peshawar, which is on the other side of the country, get her in, and then drive her back. So we started working on that. We started talking to people, and an ambulance was arranged. All right, you guys come back, and then everything works on cash in Pakistan. Credit is haram. So we drove back, and by the time the ambulance was on the way to Peshawar, the little girl passed away. The other thing while we were in Peshawar that we saw was that a bunch of corrupt Christian politicians and church workers, not clergy, but church workers, they were siding with the Islamists. So there was like, the church owns a lot of property from the British era. There's a systematic process going on where they're trying to take over the property. So they're selling under the guise of, hey, you can use the money for your community better. So, and there was an organization set up called the Church Property Bachao Tehreek, so the movement to save church property. So we started talking to them as well, that guys, this is just not on. Half the hospitals, half the schools, half the vocational colleges, they're gone. There's like apartment complexes there, there's shopping malls there, what's going on? And they're like, well, yeah, all of this is in collaboration with Christian politicians. So it was like a grounds-up movement, started off initially by younger Christians, to people who were in like early to mid-20s, 30s, and as it kind of grabbed more foothold, our voice got stronger. So by the time we got back to Lahore, and we became very active members and very vocal members of, hey, the government, if they wanted, they could A, stop this, B, if the same protection is offered to the Shia communities, And, well, all the Islamic sects, they basically hate each other. So everybody gets protection. The church gets super minimal protection. Like, why can't they do the same for us? The army can step in. The army is the strongest body or the official body in Pakistan. If they wanted, they could prevent this. It's just that they don't care. And these things were not resonating very well with general community. We were again approached and asked, hey, you know what, we get your pain. We would feel the same way if our kids were slaughtered like this as well, but you need to turn it down like 20 notches at this point, and basically toe the line that we regret this, and then, yes, the only valid target is a man of fighting age, which is like 18 to 40, but obviously we did not stop. And then, I think if things had mellowed down, perhaps, in retrospect, I suppose the anger would have subsided within us as well, and we would have spoken out less. But right on the heels of this, there was a Christian shanty town called Joseph Colony, which was on the outskirts of this industrial zone, and the prime minister, so AKA the president's son, he owned a lot of warehouses and a lot of smelters and steel warehouses there. And he wanted to expand on that. He couldn't because there was a Christian shanty town there. So what they did was they implicated one person. Basically, the problem is for a non-Muslim against a Muslim, you don't need proof. You just need two witnesses to verbally say something, and the statement holds. So these two men stood up and said, we heard this guy say stuff which is disrespectful to our book, our prophet, our religion. Like, well, no Christian in Pakistan is actually stupid enough to say that. They're not. I mean, before you can learn to walk, that's what your parents say. Do not say stuff like this. Do not repeat this. There are certain things you can say. There are certain things you cannot. There's a lot of small little things. So this is going back from when I was slightly older than him. So when I started going to K4, the first thing my parents told me was, always eat and drink with your right hand. I'm left-handed, so I would reach for this. No, you basically, that's un-Islamic. You're not supposed to do that. You can get into a lot of trouble for doing that. Never drink water standing up. Another Islamist thing. So these are just small little things that you're told from the age 4. So do you really think that you're basically being trained from a very young age not to mess with the overlords? That I would be stupid enough at 25 or something to actually go and say stuff like that. You can get arrested for playing music in your car during Muharram. Just small little things like that. So they made the story up. And that was just a way. So a Muslim mob then attacked Joseph Colony immediately after the accusation. Like I said, if you're lucky, you're arrested and thrown in jail. That rarely ever happens. So the mob attacked the colony. They basically ransacked 150 houses, beat people. There were 65 confirmed dead. And they basically burned the entire place down, razed it, and then 3 months later, well, it's unused land, let's just turn it into warehouses. So that's what happened. So all of that kind of like makes your blood boil, and it does. I mean, so I think the best analogy is, if you've already got a cut and you hit it somewhere, it hurts more. So I think that's what kept on happening for us. We were not the only ones. We know a bunch of people our age who went through very similar circumstances, or in the US or the UK or Canada or somewhere, because they had to flee as well. So it's not like we're like a isolated event which happened. This is something which happened to a lot of us around the same time. So when all of this was actually transpiring, I think what the ultimate last nail was that the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan basically made a statement that, you know what, following the same rationale of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, women's places at home, and education of women should be banned. So that kind of hit home for the Muslims as well, because their daughters were going to colleges and having professions, and they did not want their daughters to go back to the dark ages. So all of a sudden, we weren't that bad, and because their kids were going to the same college, they're like, hey, you guys need to up your game, because they could basically wipe out our entire female population. So the university had their security manager was called General Arun Pervez. He was a retired Christian general who served in the Pakistani/British Army. So really old gentleman at that point, in his late 80s. I was extremely good friends with him, so he said, hey, I don't understand how tech works. Obviously, we need CCTV and whatever. And like, hey, Chester, would you be able to help me with this? I'm like, sure. I mean, I've played Call of Duty. I can do that. So in retrospect, that was probably not the smartest thing I ever did, but I actually asked that, hey, could I be given the additional charge for the additional security manager for the university? And they're like, yeah, sure. I mean, we were looking for someone because nobody's wanting to do this. So yeah, all of a sudden, I was, instead of doing my day job, I was doing like really cool stuff like putting up CCTV cameras and having blast walls put up and ramp-proof doors and gates for the university, basically turning into Fort Knox. And then that basically got me talking to a lot of people from the establishment. And because a lot of the security establishment was talking to me, and they're like, well, what are your views on this? Well, it's unfortunate this happened. I'm like, yeah, well, this is nothing. Nothing actually happened yet. You're just scared. What about this, and this? So they said, you know what, Chester, we've explained this to you before. We'll actually come pay you guys a visit tonight. I'm like, okay, sure, yeah, why not? Come over for tea. So these people, they ring our doorbell. I think it's like 7 or 8. That's early evening for Pakistan. We stay up pretty late in the night and wake up late in the day. So warm climate makes more sense. But anyways, so these people come and they're, hey, we're from Markaz Abdullah bin Masood, which is a religious seminary in a place called Johar Town, which is a suburb of Lahore. And they're like, we're here to talk to you guys. I'm like, okay, welcome. So they're like, you're a really smart guy, you're just misguided. You'll understand when we talk to you about how all this works. We actually have been really impressed with the way you've handled yourself. You've dealt with really difficult situations. You're a vocal person. You stand by your beliefs and conviction. So basically, I mean, I wish he was in the room because all the good things they said about me. so I was like, really? That's me? So, yeah, but women aren't allowed there, unfortunately. So. But they're like, well, I mean, you're the best thing since sliced bread. The only thing wrong with you is you're not Muslim. I was like, okay, I mean, I wouldn't really consider that being something wrong with me, but sure, I'll go with it. So they're like, we would like you to give you the Dawat-e-Islam. Now, the Dawat-e-Islam basically is, literally speaking, invitation to convert to Islam. Now, under Islamic law and tradition, the highest honor a non-Muslim can get is being given the invitation to convert. So by just the mere act of me saying, no, thank you, I'm good, that's blasphemy, because by the act of saying no, I have disrespected their book, their prophet, their religion. So that makes me something called wajibul qatl, which means okay to kill. So but there are defenses you can use. Like I said, you're for and you're programmed to kind of deflect, not counter, but deflect attacks and kind of buy time and try and kind of hope and pray that the problem goes away. They knew this was a good way to get me to quiet down because either I would accept and they will have a poster boy, or B, I say no or they get their way. The C is a relatively less known way, but very well-practiced sense way is, you can quote things like the Al-Barqa 256, which is a verse from the Quran, where essentially you're saying is everybody's technically allowed to have their own faith, and then it goes into like 20 sub-bullets where like, if they do this, 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 and this, and basically don't mess with the Islamic State, you're fine. And then goes on to say, yes, and if they are willing to convert, they should not do it under the duress of harm, because that's like a guaranteed ticket to hell. I'm like, well, you know, I've always, ever since I was a kid, I was really inclined by the faith, and I wanted to always embrace Islam. But if I do this now, that's a guaranteed ticket to hell for me. So give me my time. I'm reading up on it, and as I am guided towards it, I will eventually find my way there. And they're like, okay, we can work with that. Let's keep on meeting periodically for coffees. so that kind of set the stage up for, we knew we were, at this point we knew, I mean, there's no, all right, you know what, they just forget about us, and then they go do their next big thing. They play the long game. They know that the ball is in our court. We have to make the next move. We played the card which they cannot unplay. So it's basically, okay, let's see what happens from this point on. So those talibs, so talib basically means student. So they're from a seminary. That's how the setup works. The Markaz Abdullah bin Masood, the Islamist center is that. The Taliban basically means students. So the talibs were basically on a regular checking in on us kind of thing. Hey, how are you doing? Do you want to show up? So I would actually show up at their like religious things. I don't even know what it's called in English, but it's like a tablighi ijtima is the word. So like a evangelical conference is the most loose basically a translation of it, but it's more like a rallying your troops up kind of a meeting where basically it's all hate speech when you get there. Hey, you're doing this, this is perfect, we need to stop listening to music, and women should stop using nail polish because that's sinful, and then billboards should not have pictures of human faces on it, and it's just weird stuff. I'm like, oh my God, I'm meeting the Klingons today. But, I mean, you kind of persevere through it, and you know that's the only way out. So this basically set our last 6-7 months there in motion, where they were beginning to then lose their patience. They're like, hey, Chester, you've been given your chance. Sit down and talk to us now. And then if you need clarifications, we can help you. Whatever you need, let us know. We'll help you along the way. But if you think we're gonna lose interest and walk away, that's not going to happen. While all of this was going on, we were still participating in a lot of activities which they were not super happy about. So I actually went with her uncle, the bishop, to Islamabad to meet the UN envoy for educational development. And one of the things that we actually spoke about also was that, yes, we totally understand that, but all the additional persecution that Christians are facing, actually past education, even if they get vocational education, they're not allowed to go get a job or not welcome for a job interview. So this needs to be worked on as well. Yes, education, good. I can be a nurse, but if I'm going to sit home and my only option or my only recourse is to basically either be a garbage worker or not that anything's wrong with that, but I mean, you don't go to college for 4 years, but just because you're doing that. And the word got out again, and so I get a call saying, come on, man, I mean, which part of we're telling you stop, cease, desist? We've already shown you the merit of the ways. I mean, these people have the whole world open to them. All they've got to do is just renounce Christianity and be a part of the fold, and the problem goes away. So why are you not understanding this? I'm like, okay, sure, that's not what I meant, but until they come to that conclusion, you cannot marginalize them to this degree. So all of that was really contributing to get their patience grow really, really thin with me. So the last straw came in the summer of 2015, where after a debate with them, where they were basically trying to force on, hey, stuff like, you know, you've had your options, are there any questions? And then I counter-questioned them a couple of things, which is a bit of a theological debate on Islam, and then, you know, you can always play them. So you can always play them with things like, well, the Prophet had this vision for women. He had joint congregations, and then the caliphs came in and they segregated them. More notably, Uthman did this. So my opinion is this. I'm like, you know what? All of a sudden, you're going from a Christian to a Muslim heretic. Find the middle ground. So I mean, again, I wish I had learned to keep my mouth shut, but I didn't. But then they throw curveballs at you, and you know they're going to throw those curveballs at you. So my last name, Hussain, is a hardcore Muslim name. It's not a Christian last name. The story behind that, and it'll kind of help set the context, is A, your passport and your birth certificate and your driver's license say your religion on it. B, it says Hussain, so like, okay, so you're a Christian and you're Hussain. How does that compute? So a little side story. My great-grandfather was a Muslim scholar, Mia Muhammad Hussain, and he was from a very affluent family, and he had lands on the other side of the country. So, and this is going back to like the late 19th, early 20th century. So he would travel by first class, and he became, friends is not the word, he became acquainted with a priest, Reverend Whitbread, who was a Lutheran priest. And they would have these intellectual conversations, and they would write to each other, and then they would schedule their journeys together. So it was like an overnight train trip, and they would have a theological debate. So, well, evidently, Reverend Whitbread won, because he converted, and he gave up his fortune and his, so it's called the Gadinashin, where you have like it's kind of like you're not like the prince or a duke of the area, but you're like the religious version of that. So he gave that up, and he became a priest, and he was the vicar of the Lahore Cathedral, and he married a Welsh lady, Rose Matilda, who was my great-grandmother. So I'm 1/16 Welsh. And then all of that is history. But in his infinite wisdom, my great-grandfather thought that his testament to Christ would be he would not change his name. So Reverend Muhammad Hussain was what he became. And I'll show you guys pictures someday that his gravestone still says that. He had obviously never been to a Western airport, because every time I get always selected by chance for a random check. I never win the lottery though, but that's the reason. So that's the first curveball they throw at you. Well, what's your name, Hussain? And because they know the story, but they just want you to say it in so many words, because then you're going to blaspheme by saying that, because apostasy, again, pretty much anything is punishable by death. So, or chopping your hand off, or a combination, or whipping. So, they want you to say it, and I'm like, well, you know why. And they're like, but then I counter that by saying, but yes, you know why the last name is Hussain, and I think it's because of the last name that I'm still drawn to try and learn about you guys. And they're like, oh, okay, so you're playing it smart. And so, all right, you know, you have this one. we'll talk about it again. And that did not last very long. This is May-ish time. Come July, they probably had some kind of target to keep or something. Come July, I get a call saying, hey, Chester, you know what? Your time's up. You've got to convert, man. You've got to do it in 24 hours. And all of a sudden, all the niceties are gone. And they're being really abrupt and like, all right, we need to sit down and figure this out. I'm like, yeah, you're calling me on a Thursday morning, and you want me to convert in public. So that's usually done after a Friday prayer, which is basically tomorrow. So the plan basically is to show up at the Jama Masjid, which is like the local big mosque, not the smaller mosques. And then you convert in public, and there's like media there, and they garland you and whatever, and then they gift you stuff. All right, here's the keys to a new house. There you go, a new car. And then everybody's kind of trying to like outdo the other person, because the more you do that to the new poster boy, the more Allah's going to be pleased with you. So if not, I mean, that's like a big, huge win for them, and they're kind of like gearing up for that, because they know we don't have any recourse. They know. It's not like I can go to the police and say, you've got to help us out, because the police will, well, I mean, I don't really see what the problem is here. So you're stuck. So at that point, I called her and said, you know what? I think our time's done. We need to figure something out now. And she's like, yeah. So what did they say? I said, well, they said they want to meet me tonight. And she said, okay, let's talk to them and just try and figure something out. Let's get our visas renewed. So a visa extension or a visa renewal to the UK is basically $500 per person. There was 4 of us now, so we had our son. So we were like, hey, we're not going this year. Let's have our visas renewed next year. So we did not have valid visas on our passports for the UK anymore. So she's like, oh, okay, it takes about 45 days to 90 days. So if we can get that time, let's get that renewed. I think we've basically overstayed our welcome here at this point. Let's start working on this. I was like, okay. Just a little side note. The year before, we had actually come to the US to meet her best friend who lives in New Jersey. And so we applied for a visit visa to the US. And the US government decided to give us 10-year visas, which is like a multiple entry visit visa. It's called a B2 visa. You can come and go as you please. So that was the only valid visa we had. And we're like, okay, worst case, we have that, but I mean, what are we going to ever do in the US? So I thought, okay, I'll think on this. So I spend the day at work, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what to do, kind of like strategizing on, okay, they're going to say this, I'm going to say this, then they're going to try and counter me with this, they're going to say, well, show up tomorrow, or things are going to get really out of hand. So I get home, and it's their Maghrib prayers, which is their sunset prayer time. They said, we'll meet you right after Maghrib prayers. So I get home, and these guys are already there. So there's about 12 or 14 of them. And so their standard mode of operation are the twin-cam Toyota trucks, like a F-150. And then there's a bunch of them with motorcycles, like the minions are on the motorbikes. And so they're there, and they're like, hey, Chester, are you showing up tomorrow? I'm like, no, I still need to think this through. And before I could complete my sentence, they basically, so I was talking to them standing right next to my car. They basically grabbed me and they just started beating me. They just went all out. They just started beating me, smashed my car up. I'm literally outside my house. So the good thing is they don't go inside houses like that, because if they disrespect a woman, then things get a lot difficult for them, and that strengthens my case. I could potentially go to a different sect and get their protection. They would still want me to convert, of course, but they could get a bad rep for actually doing that. So they're smashing house windows, chanting slogans. I think they beat me for a good 15, 20 minutes. I think I managed to tear ligaments in both my knees. And they're like, okay, we'll see you tomorrow at Jummah prayers, brother. So that's basically their version of a shot off the bow. So I kind of got to live through it. So that was the starting point. So, and at this point, we're freaking. For the lack of I wish I'd say something like, you know what, I was just totally calm and I just got into the house and we did this and we were super methodical. No. We were panicking. So they basically smashed the car. We couldn't drive that car anymore. So I called my cousin up, and he lives in so Lahore is a city of 12 million people. Chicago is 3 million. So you can do the math of how big the city is. So I'm like, dude, you're on the other side, but you've got to come get us. We can't live here, obviously. We cannot be here tomorrow morning, because tomorrow morning, unless I'm kind of seen getting ready for Friday prayers and leaving the house, we're dead. So he said, all right, you know what? Just drive your car. It doesn't matter if it doesn't have a windscreen. Just drive, go. So we grabbed the kids. We could just grab whatever we could. So we made like a little bag, grabbed anything we possibly could, and we just drove. And we went to their place, and we're trying to think through what to do next. We're like, well, we can't stay here. We could try and relocate to a different part of the country, but Pakistan has 3 airports. One in Karachi, one in Islamabad, one in Lahore. There's one in Peshawar, but we don't count that. So it's not like you can just drive to Milwaukee and get a flight from a smaller airport. There was like 3 airports. There's very limited ways for you to get out. So we got to his house, and we're like, you know what? We can't go to the UK. We don't have updated visas. Unfortunately, the only way we can make it is if we somehow get to the US and then get to the British High Commission and ask them, guys, this is what's happened. Could you please renew our visa so we can go back to a country we're familiar with? And it sounded like a good plan for us at the time. We weren't thinking through it. So I told my cousin, you know what, you need to go somehow just fill 2 suitcases up with whatever you can and bring him. I'll look for flights in the meantime. So I looked for flights, and the earliest flight we could find was a flight to JFK with 3 seats on it. There's 4 of us. So I'm like, oh, wonderful. So what do we do now? So, all right, so she and the 2 kids go. We put them on the flight. The flight's in 6 hours. So this is all happening from like, I think this is about 9-ish, and her flight is at 2 in the morning. So we just get 2 suitcases. We don't even know what he packed, know what he threw in. I said, all right, I'll take them from here to the airport. You grab our stuff and bring over. So we get to the airport. We put him on the flight, and they're like, well, we're not leaving you. I'm like, well, there's not a lot of choice at this point. Just go. I'll figure something out. So I look for another flight. Luckily, I find one. Again, there's like not a lot of flights out of Lahore. So, and pretty much everything, you kind of have to go through UAE to get to the US, because you have to go through homeland. If you're coming from a place like Pakistan especially, the immigration is actually done outside physical US borders, so that way they screen out, any potential threats outside US soil before the person actually gets to US. So these guys leave, and then I'm trying to look for another ticket. Luckily, I did find another ticket, which was in another 4 or 5 hours. So, and that was like the longest 4 or 5 hours for me, because we knew those people were looking for us. They got the 2 suitcases. I had a hand carry, and I was sitting there, and you're not suspicious at all. You're going to the US, and you've got like a 1 little hand carry, no carry-on, no check-ins, baggage, or anything, and then you're sweating, and they're like, sir, are you all right? I'm like, yeah, it's just really hot in here. I'm like, no. So, yeah. So, luckily, I was able to get out, obviously, but luckily, people were getting calls, hey, we're trying to find Chester, and I had turned my phone off, so my cousin got a call as well that, hey, we're looking for Chester and his family. We met them earlier, and we were supposed to meet them early today, so these guys get up at 4 in the morning, because that's when their first prayer is, so their day starts at 4, so they're up. So they're like, hey, we went to their house, they're not there, so do you know where they went? And he's like, no, I have no clue. I haven't spoken to them in, I don't know, a couple of weeks. Maybe they went out shopping again. Stuff opens up early morning, and then it shuts down at by 8 or 9, and then it opens later in the day because it's like boiling hot during the day. So they're like, oh, okay. Just if you talk to him, let him know that we're looking for him. I'm like, like, okay. So anyways, luckily they did not get to me, but I was like 100% sure that one of these security guards or an immigration official is going to be one of them, and he's going to walk up and say, sir, somebody's looking for you, and that's it, I'm gone. They're going to figure out, oh, he didn't get here, they must have got him, kind of. And I become narcissistic. So luckily that did not happen, and I got on the plane, and I landed in the US. I mean, we knew her friend there, and we stayed with them for a couple of days. Her brother was going to UWM here, so the only person, I mean, we've got relatives in the country, but the only people we were basically comfortable staying for a longer duration of time with was basically her brother, and we'd never driven a left-hand drive before. So Pakistan's right-hand drive, the UK's right-hand drive, so the best way to learn how to drive a left-hand drive car, get a car from Avis and drive from New York to Wisconsin. If you make it, you're good. If not, well, you tried. So that's what we did. So once we got there and got our bearings after the first 48 hours, and the trauma kind of like simmered down, that's when the fun starts, because you basically now have to try and figure out what to do next. So you obviously have to go to Homeland first and tell them this happened. So we went to the Department of Homeland Security, downtown Milwaukee, and told them, hey, this is what has happened, but we don't intend to stay in the US. We intend to move on and go to the UK and do this, but obviously it's on US soil, so you guys have to be told first. And I said, sir, I'm sorry, that's not how international law works. You have to claim asylum in the first safe country you land in. So it's not like you can pick and choose that now that you're in the US, I want to go to Scandinavia instead. Nope, this is where you stay. So basically our fate was kind of set at that point. Like, okay, I mean, the other choice being going back to Pakistan, like, yeah, sure, we'll take this. So, yeah, and then the next 13 months were grueling. So they give you the leave to remain. So that's where the system's kind of slightly broken, though. They give you the leave to remain in the US. They did not give you a social security number, so you're not allowed to legally work, but you're allowed to live. It's not like I have like a spare $1 million laying around, so you do what you can. And so I basically found a job, cash in hand, north in Titonia. So there's a gas station there, that's where, and the guy was brutal. I mean, he helped me a lot, so I shouldn't say that, but it was a 12-hour shift, 7 days a week, no days off, $7 an hour. That's what I got. That's the hand that I got dealt. That's what I had to play with. And then you have to go in and meet Homeland, and they put you in a room, and they take pictures and conversations and voice samples, and basically trying to figure out if you're like an undercover terrorist. And then they corroborate your story in every way, shape, or form. And after the 13 months, when the review was entirely done, they called us in, and they knew everything. So Big Brother knows. So all the stuff they show in the movies is all true, because it said, well, yeah, Markaz Abdullah bin Masood, these are the people who came. This was the person who was leading the group. This is what happened. This is what happened after. This is what led up to it. So, and after all of that is said and done, they're like, yep, we approve your request for asylum in the US. So welcome to the US. You can get a green card after a year and become a citizen 4 years after, yada, yada, yada. You can now apply for a social security number. So we applied. Another 6 months, after all the documents done, we got our social security number, so we went back to looking for jobs and stuff. But in a nutshell, that's how it happened. And that's how we got here. Right on the dot of 40 minutes.
Great. We said we would leave some time for questions. Yeah, go ahead, Chao.
I'm just wondering, they're all forms of Islam. You mentioned the Sunni, and in Saudi Arabia, Watanabe or something?
Wahhabi.
Wahhabi. Mm-hmm. And there's Shia.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, the current Islamic fundamentalism, what do you think brought that on? And the reason I'm asking is, when I was a freshman in college, I had a friend who was from Palestine. His father had been the mayor of Jerusalem before the partition. And he went to Jesuit schools and sent his son to Marquette here because he wanted his son to go to a Jesuit school. And he doesn't, I never have seen him act in a way that you were treated. You know, you have to do this, this, and this, or else you're apostate. Just in your opinion, from what you've lived through, what do you think made this form of Islam go to this radical form of Islam?
So that's a very good question. It's a very multifaceted question. So I'll try and take the shortest route through. So Islam, basically, when it was started, I think it was like 632 is when the Prophet Muhammad died. So 610, because he was prophet for 20 years. It was a militant religion. These guys were marginalized by the Jews in the area and the other non-Muslim tribes which were in the area, and these people fought back. So the feeling of militancy is kind of like super ingrained in the faith. Going to Palestine, the tables have turned. They're on the receiving end of things, if that's probably not the most politically correct way of saying it, but sure. They have to kind of go through, to a very large degree, being in Palestine or West, I'm not sure, whether on the West Bank or the Gaza side of things. They know that they have to be like politically correct, and then a lot of people are progressive. Unfortunately, what actually happened like late 70s is when the tide kind of began to turn. The Muslim population generally all over the world were going through this era of colonialism, and the colonial powers had done a relatively decent job of assimilating these people in. And then as the colonial powers receded back to their own physical borders and these people were left to their own devices, all these oppressive dictatorships came around all over the world in some way, shape, or form, all over. I mean, you can start from Iraq to Libya to Jordan, even to Saudi Arabia. The Al Sauds took over what is now Saudi Arabia and made it into their version of Wahhabism. Same thing in Pakistan, India, Afghanistan was supposed to, Jordan, Afghanistan, Lebanon, these were all like hangout places. You know, where should we go, Paris or Lebanon? So like you wouldn't really think that anymore at this stage. But all that oppression where all the rich elite who were super aligned to the West were basically living the good life, and all these people were being constantly oppressed. And something began to break constantly all over. I know it happened in our country as well. Populist movements came to power. Same thing essentially happened in Iran. Different sect, it was Shias in their case. And if you're in a desperate situation and somebody's kind of throwing you a lifeline, and usually it's the Islamists, they've always been there. Their numbers were a lot smaller, but that's a good recruiting tool. You're talking about 6-year-old working at tire shops in Pakistan. They have no recourse. The only reason their parents give birth to them is because they can put them to work and they can help the family. And all of a sudden, you're telling the child, you know what, you don't have to work at a tire shop at 4 in the morning and work through the brutal heat of the day, but instead, come to the madrasa, we'll give you clothes, you get 3 meals a day, and you learn the Quran. Pretty easy choice. And that's over a generation and a half, 2 generations. You get a hardcore Islamist. His dad was an Islamist, he's an Islamist, his kids are Islamists, and it's a secure, safe environment. Their structure of society works. As surprising as that may sound, for everything bad that I might have referred to earlier, crime is unheard of, because even if you steal a loaf of bread, you get your hand chopped off. So is it worth it? No. So there is a sense of security, there's a sense of belonging. The way the structure works is kind of like how a nomadic society in 6th century Arabia would work as well. Everybody gets a job once they've grown up. All right, if you don't have a vocation, you work as a security guard for us, or you work as a librarian, or you work as a custodian of some sort. So they basically make sure their people are looked after. That's a pretty strong argument for how the change basically works and what basically, and then the Arabization is the word I use instead of extremism, because the entire purpose of radical Islam is to have one global mentality of how a Muslim mind works. So we used to have a very popular festival called Basant, which is a spring festival. There was like kite flying and kite fighting and dancing, and obviously you cannot have women outside the household, so the dancing and the music and everything goes away. And then everything fun is basically haram, so they basically outlawed Basant in Pakistan. That's a cultural event that our state has had for at least 600-700 years. So they're rewriting history. It's because of the fact that these people who have been brainwashed themselves over a course of, 40 years now, are now second, third generation into power. The reason it started, there were good reasons behind why these movements started. The ruling elite was not at all concerned about the lower classes. The Islamists found that vacuum, they filled that void, they helped people initially, and then they thought, okay, this is a good way to make a play for power. And examples are all over. The Muslim Brotherhood in Turkey, Egypt, they're all over. They have different shapes or forms. There's different, so outside the well-known Muslim sects, there's others. There's Deobandis, there's Wahhabis, there's God knows. You just know different color turbans. So the green turban ones are these, the black and white are these, the yellow ones are these. So that's how we kind of learned when we were kids. So the end goal is the same. The purpose is get them into the fold, you grow your support base, and the ultimate play is, you try and form the provincial government or state government here. But for a person who's basically suffering child labor, what do I care what political allegiance I end up following? As long as I'm looked after, I'm not being beaten, abused, whatever, and working. And the parents are incentivized, so they get a stipend for sending the child to the madrasa. So I think that's incentive enough.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
So just as a comment, I want to say, when you were talking about, as a young child at the age of 4, the conversations that your parents needed to have with you about what you could and could not do, I was also reminded how our African-American neighbors have the same type of conversations with their children at very young ages, and from that moment on, they're different. And I just think it's important that we remind ourselves of that. But on the immigration side, over the last years of the past administration, regardless of anyone's politics, the immigration system in this country, the welcoming system in this country, just got obliterated. And we're trying to build it back. I work in the social sector, and we're trying to build that system back. When you think about the experience your family had with immigrating into the United States, did it feel welcoming to you? Did you feel the church community wanted to come around you and support your family so that you didn't have to financially have such a difficult time in feeling welcome and moving forward? How could it have been different?
Okay, well, thank you for the question. Again, multifaceted. So the church community first has nothing to do with the immigration system. The short answer to that is yes. Her brother goes to Eastbrook. Eastbrook were the first people we met. Eastbrook has a center on the south side to help refugees. We were too proud to accept financial aid. We went the other route, found a job, not totally legal, but still, that's the route I went. the immigration system being broken. There is no immigration system. The American immigration is basically built around getting a skilled worker in. That is it. That is the only system that is in place. We, luckily, after the initial phase, we had college degrees. We could get to work. We spoke the language. For an average immigrant, let's say an Afghan who's coming in, or a Haitian, or whoever, there is no system. There's an entire ministry in Canada that deals with immigrants. They basically put you on a plane from Afghanistan, land you off here, you get a week stay at an Air Force base, and it's like, all right, good luck. So there is no system in place. Unfortunately, there's no documents or guidance in place for anyone. We found out like a month or two after that we could take our kids to the North Shore Clinic to get shots, because obviously you don't have a health insurance at that point when you first get here. There is no one handbook. Canada, I know for a fact that they do classes sponsored by the government, they do vocational programs and placement programs, and none of that exists. The United States immigration program, there's two primary immigration systems here. There's one family-based system, so if I wanted to sponsor my brother or sister or whoever, I could sponsor them, they could come. And the rationale behind it is, if Jimmy gets here, Jimmy gets to live with me for 6 months, and then he gets on his feet and just starts working. The other system essentially is the H-1B program, where you're trying to get the smartest and the brightest people from all over the world, and they're coming over and they're filling skill jobs, which the US does not have the capacity to fill based on its current available resource pool. So you've got doctors, lawyers, engineers, accountants, whoever. These are people who come in and they're basically, as soon as they land, they're making a positive contribution and actually paying taxes on income of over 100K. So that's what the system's geared for. The rest you build the wall for, right? And then keep out. So that's what the US system is designed to do.
We have kept you and asked you to address us now for a really long time. There are so many different things that are happening within me. I am once again have this sense of my eyes, like blinders falling off, and this whole window into so many aspects of our world kind of opening up. And we can hear your story through the lens of the political, the economic, the religious, just this incredible story on a human interest level. I just want to thank you for sharing what in many cases was traumatic, and for us to ask you to come up in front of us and to relive some of the most deeply traumatic moments of your life, just to give us that window and to open us to these new realities is really, I'm profoundly grateful, and I know I speak for all of us for that. So why don't we thank Ambreen and Chester.
Thank you.
And the baby, and Ethan, who's out like a light.
He was born here, he didn't get to share the